The hardest thing to prove is not a name, a title, or a uniform. The hardest thing to prove is the truth that nobody can see. The early morning lights of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport reflected across the polished floors as thousands of travelers moved through the terminals. Families carried their luggage toward departure gates, business travelers checked their schedules, and airport employees prepared for another busy day. Among the crowd was a man who looked like any other passenger. He carried a simple bag, wore a quiet expression, and walked with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. His name was Marcus Reed. To the people around him, he was just another traveler passing through the airport. They could not see the years of dedication behind his eyes. They could not see the difficult missions, the endless training, or the commitment that came from serving his country. Marcus had spent years as a Navy SEAL, but he never carried himself like someone searching for recognition. He believed honor was not something a person demanded from others. It was something earned through actions when nobody was watching. On the other side of the terminal, Officer Michael Carter began his shift as an airport police officer. Michael was a white officer who took his responsibility seriously. He believed his job was to protect travelers, maintain order, and respond when something seemed unusual. His badge represented authority, and he respected the responsibility that came with wearing it. Throughout his career, Michael had learned to pay attention to details. But sometimes the smallest details could create the biggest misunderstandings. That morning, Michael noticed Marcus near a security area. Something about the situation caught his attention. He observed the way Marcus carried himself and the items he had with him, but he did not yet know the complete story. He only saw the information available in that moment. And sometimes, a small piece of information can create a much larger assumption. Marcus noticed the officer approaching. He remained calm because he had experienced moments where patience mattered more than explanation. He understood that people often judged what they could immediately see before taking the time to understand what was hidden beneath the surface. He did not know what Michael was thinking, but he knew the truth would eventually speak for itself. Around them, the airport continued moving. Announcements echoed through the terminal. Travelers walked toward their gates. The world continued without realizing that a significant moment was beginning. Security cameras quietly recorded the scene above them. They did not know Marcus was a Navy SEAL. They did not know Michael was an officer trying to make a decision. They simply captured what happened. At that moment, Michael believed he was looking at a situation that needed answers. He believed he was protecting the standards of military honor. He did not know that the person standing in front of him had already spent years protecting others. He did not know that the question he was about to ask would begin a chain of events that would reach far beyond the airport terminal. Because sometimes, the person who appears to have something to prove is actually the person who has already proven everything. The truth behind a person is often hidden in the moments when others choose to look deeper. Inside Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Officer Michael Carter continued his conversation with Marcus Reed while the busy terminal moved around them. Travelers walked toward their gates, announcements echoed across the building, and employees continued their daily routines. To most people nearby, it appeared to be a simple security interaction. They saw an airport officer asking questions and a passenger responding calmly. They did not yet understand that something much deeper was unfolding. Michael focused on the details available to him. His experience had taught him that unusual situations required attention. He believed his responsibility was to protect the standards expected of him and to make sure every situation was handled properly. His intention was not to create conflict. He believed he was doing what his position required. But he had not yet discovered the complete story behind the person standing in front of him. Marcus remained respectful throughout the conversation. He understood that people often made judgments based on limited information. He had learned throughout his years of military service that patience was essential, especially during challenging moments. A person did not always need to prove themselves immediately. Sometimes the truth revealed itself through time, facts, and careful observation. Michael noticed that Marcus did not respond with frustration or defensiveness. Instead, he remained composed and cooperative. That reaction made Michael pause. The situation did not look like what he had expected. Marcus was not trying to avoid questions. He was not trying to draw attention to himself. He simply wanted the situation to be handled fairly. Nearby, a few travelers began noticing the interaction. Some wondered what was happening, while others continued on their way. In a crowded airport, small moments often disappear quickly. But this moment carried a different weight because the person being questioned had a story that had not yet been revealed. Michael continued reviewing the information available to him. He believed he was protecting the meaning behind military service and the respect associated with those who served. He did not realize that the person in front of him represented exactly what he was trying to protect. Marcus had never been someone who needed a title to define him. His actions had already created his reputation long before this airport conversation began. He believed service was not about receiving attention. It was about commitment, discipline, and doing what was right even when nobody knew your name. Above the terminal, security cameras continued recording every detail. They captured the words spoken, the choices made, and the way the situation developed. The cameras did not know Marcus was a Navy SEAL. They did not know Michael was questioning someone with a remarkable history of service. They only recorded the reality of the moment. As the conversation continued, Michael began to sense that there was more to Marcus than he first understood. The details did not fully match his original assumption. Something about this quiet passenger suggested a story much larger than the one visible on the surface. And while Michael searched for answers, Marcus remained patient, knowing that the truth had a way of appearing when people finally took the time to see it. The most difficult moments are not always the ones filled with conflict. Sometimes the hardest moments are the quiet ones when people must decide whether they will trust their first impression or search for the complete truth. Inside Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Officer Michael Carter continued speaking with Marcus Reed while the busy terminal moved around them. The conversation remained calm, but the meaning behind it was becoming more complicated. Michael still believed he was handling a situation involving a possible false claim of military service. He believed protecting the honor of those who served meant taking concerns seriously. To him, the responsibility was important. The reputation of the military was built on trust, and he felt obligated to protect that trust. But Marcus understood something Michael had not yet considered. Honor was not only found in words, uniforms, or public recognition. Honor was found in years of commitment that often remained unseen. Marcus did not try to convince everyone around him with a dramatic explanation. He simply answered questions and allowed the facts to speak for themselves. His calm response created a different kind of attention. People expected someone being questioned to become frustrated, but Marcus remained steady. His experience taught him that patience could reveal more than anger ever could. Throughout his years of service, he had learned that difficult situations were often solved by discipline and understanding. Michael noticed those qualities, even though he did not fully understand where they came from. The officer began paying closer attention to the details of the interaction. Marcus carried himself differently from someone pretending to have an identity he did not earn. There was a quiet confidence in the way he spoke and a level of composure that suggested years of experience. Michael did not have all the answers yet, but he started realizing that his original assumption might not explain the entire situation. Nearby, airport employees continued watching the interaction from a distance. Some recognized that something about the conversation felt unusual. It was not a loud confrontation. It was a moment where two people with completely different perspectives were trying to understand what was happening. Above them, security cameras continued capturing everything. The footage preserved the timeline without opinions or assumptions. It recorded the questions, the answers, and the calm manner in which Marcus handled the situation. It would later provide a clear picture of what happened during those important minutes. As the conversation continued, Michael considered asking for additional verification. He believed he was following the correct process, but he also recognized that more information was needed. He did not know that the next step would reveal a truth far beyond what anyone nearby expected. Marcus remained patient because he knew his service record existed beyond that airport terminal. He knew the years of training, sacrifice, and dedication could not be erased by a moment of doubt. He also understood that people sometimes needed time to discover the reality behind what they first believed. The airport continued moving around them, unaware that a simple question about identity was about to uncover a much bigger story. Michael was searching for proof. Marcus was waiting for the truth to arrive. And soon, the difference between suspicion and reality would become impossible to ignore. The truth often appears in the smallest details, especially when people take the time to look beyond what is immediately visible. Inside Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Officer Michael Carter continued reviewing the situation involving Marcus Reed. The busy terminal remained filled with movement, but the attention of those nearby slowly shifted toward the quiet conversation happening between the officer and the traveler. What appeared to be a simple question about identity was becoming something much more meaningful. Michael believed he was protecting the honor associated with military service. He understood that false claims about serving in the armed forces could damage the respect earned by those who truly dedicated their lives to protecting others. His concern came from a place of responsibility, but he had not yet discovered that the person in front of him represented the very honor he was trying to defend. Marcus remained composed as the process continued. He did not attempt to use his past service as a way to avoid questions. He did not demand immediate recognition. Instead, he allowed the proper steps to take place because he trusted that facts would eventually reveal the truth. That patience came from years of experience where discipline mattered more than emotion. Marcus knew that real service was not defined by attention or praise. It was defined by commitment when nobody was watching. As Michael looked closer at the information available, he noticed small details that challenged his original assumption. The way Marcus spoke, the confidence behind his answers, and the knowledge he carried did not match the idea of someone pretending to be something he was not. There was a level of professionalism that came from experience, not from trying to create an image. Michael began wondering if he had only seen one part of the story. A nearby airport employee who had been observing the situation also noticed something unusual. The interaction did not feel like a typical disagreement. Marcus was not avoiding the conversation. He was not creating difficulty. He was simply waiting for the truth to be verified. The employee quietly mentioned that additional information might help clarify the situation. Michael agreed because his responsibility was not only to ask questions. It was also to make sure those questions led to accurate conclusions. Above the terminal, security cameras continued recording the entire exchange. The footage captured every moment without knowing the identities or backgrounds of the people involved. It recorded a police officer trying to understand a situation and a veteran calmly waiting for the facts to become clear. The cameras did not recognize military achievements or professional titles. They simply preserved the reality of what happened. As more information was requested, Marcus remained still and patient. He knew his years of service could not be explained in a single sentence. He knew the truth of his journey existed beyond that airport conversation. Michael prepared to take the next step in the process, unaware that the answer he was searching for would completely change his understanding of the person standing before him. The question was no longer only about whether Marcus could prove his identity. The deeper question was whether people would recognize the truth once it finally appeared. Sometimes, the truth does not arrive with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes, it arrives through a simple confirmation that changes the way everyone understands the situation. Inside Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Officer Michael Carter continued waiting for additional information about Marcus Reed. The terminal remained busy around them, but the atmosphere of the conversation had changed. What began as a routine question had become a moment where assumptions were being tested against reality. Michael believed he was doing his duty by protecting the respect connected to military service. He understood that stolen valor was a serious concern because it involved claiming recognition that someone had not earned. To Michael, the responsibility was clear. If someone claimed to have served, that claim deserved to be verified. But what he did not know was that the person he was questioning had spent years earning the very honor he was trying to protect. Marcus remained calm while the verification process continued. He did not interrupt. He did not attempt to use his background as a shortcut. Instead, he allowed the information to speak for itself. His patience reflected the discipline he had developed throughout his years as a Navy SEAL. He had learned that difficult situations were often handled best through focus, preparation, and respect. A person did not become honorable by demanding recognition. A person became honorable through consistent actions over time. As the additional review began, small details started connecting together. The information available did not support the idea that Marcus was pretending to be someone he was not. Instead, the details suggested something much different. His knowledge, his calm manner, and the way he carried himself reflected someone with genuine experience. Michael started realizing that the situation was not about catching someone pretending. It was about understanding someone whose story had not been fully discovered yet. The airport employee who had been paying attention also noticed the change. The conversation no longer felt like a simple question of doubt. It had become a search for accuracy. Everyone involved wanted the same thing: the truth. Above the terminal, the security cameras continued recording. They captured the quiet moments that many people might have overlooked. They captured Marcus standing patiently while waiting for answers. They captured Michael carefully following the process. They preserved the reality of a moment where two people were trying to understand each other. The footage did not show a hero demanding attention or an officer refusing to listen. It showed a situation developing step by step as more information became available. Michael looked at Marcus again and began seeing more than the first impression. He saw someone who carried himself with confidence but without arrogance. He saw someone who did not need to announce his achievements because his character spoke for him. Marcus knew the truth would eventually become clear. He had spent years serving without expecting recognition, and he was prepared to wait a little longer. What neither of them knew was that the next call would bring information from a level of authority far beyond the airport terminal. A name would be checked, a record would be reviewed, and the person everyone was trying to understand would soon be recognized for the service he had already given. The moment when the truth finally arrives is often quieter than people expect. There are no dramatic announcements at first, no sudden changes in the busy world around it. Sometimes, it begins with a simple phone call that reveals what was hidden all along. Inside Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Officer Michael Carter continued waiting as additional verification was requested regarding Marcus Reed. The terminal remained full of movement, but the small space around them felt different. Everyone involved was waiting for the same thing: confirmation of the truth. Michael still stood by his responsibility. He believed that protecting the honor of military service required careful attention. He knew that real service carried meaning because of the dedication behind it. He wanted to make sure that anyone claiming such a connection was being honest. What he did not realize was that Marcus represented the very values he respected. Marcus remained patient throughout the process. He had spent years in environments where discipline mattered, where emotions had to be controlled, and where trust was earned through actions. He understood that a person's reputation was not built in a single conversation. It was built over time through choices, commitment, and sacrifice. He did not need to convince everyone around him with a speech. He simply waited for the facts to arrive. The verification process moved forward, and additional officials began reviewing the available information. Names, records, and service history were carefully checked. The atmosphere changed as more details became clear. The possibility that Marcus was pretending began to disappear, replaced by a very different reality. The person who had been questioned was not someone trying to claim an honor he did not earn. He was someone who had quietly carried that honor for years. Michael noticed the difference between what he first believed and what the facts were showing. He realized that the situation had never been only about a claim. It was about how quickly people could form conclusions before understanding the complete story. That realization stayed with him. The badge on his uniform gave him the ability to ask questions, but it also gave him the responsibility to listen carefully when the answers revealed something unexpected. Above the terminal, security cameras continued recording every moment. They captured the waiting, the questions, and the gradual change in understanding. They showed a process unfolding based on facts rather than assumptions. They preserved the moment before the truth was known and the moment when everything began to change. Then came the call that shifted the entire situation. The information was not coming from a local office or a simple database check. It came from a level of authority connected directly to the highest standards of military service. The voice on the other end confirmed that Marcus Reed's record was exactly what he had said it was. He was not pretending. He was not seeking attention. He was a genuine Navy SEAL who had served his country with distinction. For a moment, the noise of the airport seemed to fade. Michael looked at Marcus differently, not because Marcus had changed, but because the truth had finally become visible. The person he thought needed to prove himself had already done so long before that day. And the call that arrived from beyond the airport terminal revealed a lesson that would stay with everyone involved. Real honor does not need to announce itself. It only needs to be recognized. The truth had finally arrived, but the most important moments often begin after the facts become clear. Inside Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, the atmosphere surrounding Officer Michael Carter and Marcus Reed had completely changed. What started as a question about identity had become a powerful reminder that every person carries a story beyond what others can immediately see. The call confirming Marcus's military record changed the understanding of everyone involved. The man who had been questioned for possibly misrepresenting his service was, in fact, a Navy SEAL who had earned the respect connected to that title through years of dedication and commitment. Michael stood quietly as the reality of the situation settled in. He thought back to the beginning of the interaction, remembering how certain he had been about what he believed he was seeing. He had focused on protecting the meaning of military honor, but he had not yet understood that the person in front of him represented that honor. The experience forced him to consider an important lesson about responsibility. Having authority meant having the ability to make decisions, but it also meant having the wisdom to recognize when more understanding was needed. Marcus noticed the change in Michael's expression. He did not see someone who needed to be embarrassed. He saw someone experiencing a moment of reflection. Marcus understood that mistakes could become opportunities for growth when people were willing to learn from them. Throughout his years of service, he had learned that true leadership was not about proving superiority. It was about maintaining respect, even during difficult situations. He did not want attention or recognition from the people around him. He simply wanted the truth to be understood. The airport officials who reviewed the situation also recognized the importance of what had happened. The conversation was no longer only about one officer and one traveler. It became a reminder about how important careful judgment was when dealing with people whose backgrounds were not immediately visible. The security footage provided a clear record of the interaction. It showed a process unfolding step by step. It showed Marcus remaining calm and respectful. It showed Michael attempting to handle the situation according to his understanding of his responsibilities. It showed that moments of misunderstanding could become moments of learning. For Michael, the lesson went deeper than simply discovering Marcus's identity. He realized that every person he encountered had experiences, challenges, and accomplishments that might never be visible at first glance. A uniform could reveal a person's profession, but it could never reveal their entire story. A badge could provide authority, but it could not replace judgment and compassion. Marcus continued his journey with the same quiet confidence he had carried from the beginning. He did not leave the airport seeking praise or recognition. His service had never been about applause. It had always been about commitment. As the terminal returned to its normal rhythm, the moment remained with everyone who witnessed it. A question had been asked. A truth had been revealed, and a lesson had been learned. Michael had approached the situation believing he was protecting the meaning of honor. By the end, he understood something deeper. Honor was not protected by assumptions. Honor was protected by truth, respect, and the willingness to see people clearly before making a judgment. The courtroom had grown quiet in a way that felt different from before. The whispers that once filled the room with doubt had disappeared, replaced by a silence filled with realization. Olivia Hayes stood near the center of the courtroom, no longer the woman people had underestimated when she first walked through those doors. She was the person who had watched, listened, and carried the weight of every unanswered question that others were too afraid to confront. Across the room, the officer who once believed his badge gave him unlimited power lowered his eyes. The confidence that had filled his voice days earlier was gone. For the first time, he was forced to see the consequences of his choices. Olivia did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The truth had already spoken louder than anger ever could. The evidence, the reports, and the testimonies revealed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. The same system that had protected him was now demanding accountability. Imagine standing in a room where everyone once looked away, and then watching that same room finally open its eyes. That was the moment Olivia remembered most. Not the humiliation, not the unfair judgment, but the moment when silence became courage. She looked around at the families sitting in the courtroom, people who had carried their own stories of disappointment and pain. She knew this moment was bigger than one officer, one case, or one day. It was about every person who had ever felt invisible while searching for fairness. The judge slowly reviewed the final documents before placing them on the bench. His expression was no longer confident or dismissive. The weight of the truth had changed the atmosphere completely. The courtroom was no longer a place where power could hide behind appearances. It had become a place where responsibility finally had a voice. Olivia stepped forward and spoke calmly. She said that justice was not about revenge. It was not about making another person feel powerless. Justice was about restoring what had been taken away: dignity, trust, and the belief that every person deserved to be treated with respect. The officer listened quietly, understanding that the greatest consequence was not losing authority. It was realizing that authority without humanity meant nothing. Outside the courthouse, sunlight broke through the gray clouds that had covered the city that morning. People walked down the steps carrying different emotions. Some carried relief, some carried hope. Others simply carried the reminder that change begins when someone decides not to stay silent. Olivia looked toward the city streets and took a deep breath. She knew the fight for fairness would not end with one decision. There would always be challenges. There would always be people who tried to judge others before knowing their story. But she also knew something more powerful. Truth could wait, but it could not disappear. Because a badge can represent authority, but character reveals justice. And on that day, everyone learned the same lesson. The person they underestimated was the person who showed them what justice truly looked like.